I need a date, tonight. Cameron Bishop's voice was sharp as he stood in the middle of his corner office, one hand tugging at the knot of his tie while the other gripped his phone. No, not just anyone. Someone who won't embarrass me in front of the board, the press, or the governor's wife. I need someone, normal but stunning, and fast. Across from him, his assistant, a petite woman with anxious eyes, bit her lip. Sir, everyone's booked. It's a charity gala. You're not the only CEO in New York. Cameron exhaled hard and raked a hand through his dark hair. Find someone. I don't care if she's a caterer or a poet. Just make sure she doesn't talk about crystals or conspiracy theories. That's when the assistant hesitated and said, "What about Delilah?" Cameron frowned, not recognizing the name. Delilah Hayes, she's my cousin. She just moved here from Chicago. She's smart, down to earth, and honestly, gorgeous. She could pass for a model, but she's the kind of woman who still shops at thrift stores. He narrowed his eyes. Is she looking for a job? No, she works in nonprofit, teaches art to underprivileged kids. She's not interested in your money, trust me. That was oddly refreshing. He waved his hand. Fine, call her, have her here in an hour. Delilah showed up at the office wearing jeans, sneakers, and a fitted white tee under a denim jacket. Her dark curls were pulled into a messy bun, and she looked entirely out of place among the polished glass and marble of Bishop Enterprises. "You're Cameron?" she asked, looking at him like she wasn't the least bit impressed. Cameron blinked. "Yes, you're Delilah, MMHM." She gave a half smile. "So you need a date to look good for your billionaire club, or?" He stared at her. She was beautiful, no question. Big brown eyes, golden skin, and a mouth made for trouble. But it was the way she looked at him like she didn't care who he was that caught him off guard. "It's a formal gala," he said. "Black tie, you'll need a dress. I'll have one sent to your place. I live in a studio above a bakery. You send anything there, it's gonna smell like muffins." He blinked again. She tilted her head. "You want me to play pretend for a night? Fine. But don't expect me to laugh at boring jokes or act like I'm impressed by overpriced wine." A slow grin tugged at his lips. "You might be the most honest person I've met in a decade." 2 hours later, Delilah stepped out of a private dressing suite inside an exclusive designer boutique. Cameron had shut down the entire place for her. The moment she walked out in a deep sapphire gown that hugged her curves and swept the floor, he stopped breathing. She caught him staring. "You're gonna trip over your jaw," he cleared his throat. "That dress looks expensive." She raised a brow. "You picked it. I didn't think you'd actually wear it. I didn't think you'd actually have good taste." She paused, then added, "Don't get used to it." The gala was held in a historic hotel ballroom lit with crystal chandeliers and music from a live string quartet. Cameron guided Delilah through the crowd like she belonged there, hand on her lower back, whispering introductions in her ear. She played the part perfectly charming, witty, and effortlessly graceful. But every now and then, she leaned in and whispered something sarcastic that made him laugh when he wasn't supposed to. "So," she said during dinner, spearing a piece of lobster with her fork, "do you always bring strangers to black tie events, or am I just special?" Cameron leaned in, his voice lower than before. "You're definitely not like anyone I've met. You say that now. Wait till I spill something. You won't. I might. I'll still be impressed." She looked at him for a beat, her teasing tone fading. "You're not what I expected either." "What did you expect?" She shrugged. "Arrogance, ego. A guy who'd bring a woman here to show her off like a watch." He leaned closer. "And you haven't done that." Yet she laughed, soft and surprised. Later that night, outside the hotel, as the car pulled up, he opened the door for her. She paused, turning to him. "I had fun," she said. Weirdly, he nodded. "So did I. I mean, I spent the whole night pretending to be someone else, but it wasn't terrible." "You weren't pretending," he said quietly. She blinked. "You were just being you." Delilah looked away for a second, then back at him. "Don't go falling for me, Cameron Bishop," he smiled. "I wouldn't dare." But even as he said it, something inside him shifted, because he already was. The next morning, Delilah stood barefoot in her tiny kitchen. tugging a tea bag through steaming water as dawn filtered through the window above the sink. Her heels were still by the door, and the sapphire gown hung from the closet door like a memory too bright to ignore. A knock echoed from the front of the apartment. She glanced at the clock, barely 7. When she opened the door, a man in a sharp charcoal suit held out a white box tied with navy ribbon. "For Miss Hayes," he said. "Who's it from?" He simply gestured to the box with a practiced smile and walked away. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a sketchbook bound in deep blue leather. On the first page, in clean, elegant handwriting, read, "For the girl who sees the world in color." CB. Delilah stared at it, her fingers hovering above the page. She hadn't told anyone about her sketching, not even his assistant. She turned the book over in her hands, her chest tight with something she didn't want to name. At Bishop Enterprises, Cameron stared at the skyline while his assistant recited the day's schedule. "Push the 9 o'clock and cancel the investor lunch," he said without turning around. "Again?" she asked, brows lifting. "Yes." His phone buzzed, a call from his father. He let it ring out. "Do me a favor," he added. "Find out when Delilah's lunch break is." She blinked. "You want to see her again?" He turned then, eyes sharp. "I didn't hire her for one night. You didn't hire her at all." Cameron didn't answer. He just reached for his coat. Meanwhile, Delilah stood in front of a dozen kids at a community center in Harlem, a paintbrush in her hand and a smear of blue on her cheek. The classroom buzzed with chatter and laughter, the walls covered in half-done murals and color-splashed canvases. When the director poked her head in and whispered that someone from a corporate sponsor wanted to speak with her, Delilah frowned. She wiped her hands and stepped into the hallway. Cameron leaned against the doorframe in a navy coat, holding 2 paper bags. "You tracked me down. I brought lunch. I wasn't sure if you were into kale or carbs, so I got both." She crossed her arms. "You don't strike me as the drop-in with lunch type. I'm not." "Then why are you here?" He handed her the bag. "Because I wanted to see what you looked like when you're not pretending." Delilah hesitated, then took the bag. "You mean when I'm covered in paint and smell like glue sticks?" He stepped closer. "Exactly." They sat on the edge of the courtyard behind the center, eating sandwiches on a bench surrounded by chalk drawings and abandoned soccer balls. "So," Delilah said between bites, "what do you do when you're not buying dresses and showing up uninvited?" "I run a company." "Usually 12 hours a day." "And the other 12, I pretend I'm not lonely." She looked at him then, not with pity but understanding. "That's honest," he shrugged. "You were honest with me, seemed fair." Delilah leaned back, letting the sun warm her face. "You know, I thought you'd be more untouchable." "I am, most of the time." She turned to him. "So why me?" Cameron looked at her for a long moment. "Because when you walked into my office, you didn't care who I was. You didn't try to impress me. I still don't. That's the point." She laughed under her breath. "I didn't think you'd show up again. I didn't think I would either." Later that evening, Delilah returned to her apartment to find a silver envelope slipped under her door. Inside was an invitation handwritten, no company logo, no assistant's scrawl, just 6 words, "Dinner, no suits, no pretense, see." She stared at the note, pulse quickening. She didn't do this. She didn't get swept into things she couldn't control, but she also didn't want to stop. That night, she walked into a quiet rooftop garden above an old brownstone in the West Village. Twinkle lights dripped from pergolas, and a long wooden table was set for 2, surrounded by ivy and flickering candles. Cameron stood at the edge, sleeves rolled, no tie, a bottle of wine in his hand. "You cooked?" she asked, stepping into the glow. "I ordered, but I plated it myself." She studied him. "You're really trying, aren't you?" "I don't usually have to." "That's not an answer." He poured her a glass. "I'm not used to wanting something I can't just buy." Delilah took the glass, her eyes never leaving his. "Then maybe you need to stop trying to own things and start learning how to earn them." He held her gaze. "I'm trying to learn." As the night wore on, they talked about things neither had shared with anyone in years. She told him about her mother's addiction. He told her about the pressure of a legacy he didn't ask for. She shared her fear of losing herself in someone else's world. He admitted he didn't know who he was outside of his title. By midnight the wine was gone and the silence was soft, not awkward. "I should go," she said. "I don't want you to." She stood anyway, heart thudding. "Delilah," he said, stepping closer. She waited. "I don't know what this is yet," he said, "but I know I don't want it to end." She reached up, brushed a curl behind her ear. "Then don't let it." And for the first time in years, Cameron didn't feel like the one in control, he felt like the one falling. Cameron hadn't planned on seeing Delilah again so soon. He told himself the rooftop dinner would buy him a few days to recalibrate, to remember who he was before she walked into his life. But that morning, sitting in his boardroom while executives droned on about quarterly projections, his mind wandered to the way she tucked her knees beneath her chair when she laughed, and the way her eyes lingered on the skyline like it held secrets only she could see. So when the meeting ended, he headed straight to the elevator, ignoring the raised eyebrows and veiled questions from his COO. He didn't owe anyone an explanation, not about her. He found her at the Brooklyn Arts Collective, a reclaimed warehouse turned community space. The open studio smelled like clay and oil paint, and soft music played from a speaker tucked into a windowsill. Delilah stood at a long table, guiding a group of teenagers through a collage project, her expression focused but relaxed. When she noticed him, her brows lifted. "You lost, I could be," he said, stepping closer, "but I think I found the right place." She set down a pair of scissors. "The kids are finishing up in 10. You're welcome to wait, unless you're allergic to newspaper ink and glitter. I'll take my chances." He watched her from a bench along the wall, struck by the way the kids responded to her, not with obligation or politeness, but with respect. She didn't speak to them like they were broken or in need of saving. She spoke like they mattered. When the last student left and the door closed behind them, she leaned against the table and crossed her arms. "You came all the way out here to watch me teach. I needed to see you without the candlelight and borrowed dresses." She tilted her head. "And you're even more dangerous in daylight." She gave a half laugh and pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "If you're here to sweep me off to another rooftop dinner, I'm busy. We're painting a mural this weekend and I promised to prep the base before Friday. I'm not here for dinner. No, I want you to come with me to a weekend retreat. My family's board meets annually at our estate upstate. It's mostly business, but there'll be a charity auction and a garden gala. I need someone there who won't flinch when my aunt asks invasive questions or when the press tries to corner me." Delilah squinted at him. "So you want me to run interference? I want you to be yourself." That's what unsettles them. She walked past him, grabbing a rag from the sink and wiping her hands. "I'm not a PR stunt, Cameron, I know. And I'm not interested in being paraded around as some kind of proof that you're more grounded than the tabloids say." He stepped in front of her, gently taking the rag from her hands. "I don't want to parade you. I want you to be there because I can breathe when you are." Her breath caught. "That's not a normal thing to say. I haven't felt normal since I met you." Delilah looked down, the silence thick between them. "Upstate?" she asked finally. "Is this one of those estates with horses and security gates? There's a vineyard, and a lake, and yes, a gate. No horses, though." She hesitated. "I'll come, but only if I can bring my camera. You take photos?" "When I don't trust my words," he nodded, something soft edging his voice. "Bring it." That weekend, the estate rose out of the hills like something from a forgotten century. Stone arches, ivy trailing down balconies, a driveway that curved through manicured grounds wide enough to land a plane. The car stopped beneath a sweeping portico, and a butler opened the door before they could reach for the handle. Delilah stepped out in worn jeans and a linen blouse, camera slung around her neck. She looked up at the massive house and let out a low whistle. "Is this a home or a monarchy?" Cameron chuckled as he joined her. "Depends on which uncle you ask." Inside, marble floors gleamed beneath towering ceilings, and the scent of lilies drifted through the halls. A woman in her 60s with silver blonde hair and sharp cheekbones approached, heels clicking like a metronome. "Cameron," she said coolly, "you're late." "Only by 5 minutes, Aunt Alina." Her eyes shifted to Delilah. "And this must be the woman you neglected to mention in your RSVP." Delilah extended a hand. "Delilah Hayes, I teach art at a nonprofit in the city." Alina blinked, then shook her hand with visible hesitation. "How charming," Delilah smiled. "I brought my camera. I hope you don't mind if I capture the grounds. As long as you stay out of the wine cellar." Later, after the formal dinner concluded and the guests dispersed into the drawing rooms for brandy and piano music, Cameron led Delilah through the garden paths behind the estate. Lanterns lined the hedges and the lake shimmered in the distance. "You handled Alina better than most executives do," he said. Delilah adjusted her camera strap. "She's not complicated, you just have to meet her condescension with curiosity." He laughed. "That's a tactic I'll remember." They reached the dock, the wooden boards creaking underfoot. She sat at the edge and let her legs dangle above the water. "You ever think about what life would have been like if you weren't born into this?" she asked. "Every day. And I don't think I'd have found you if I had." She looked at him, her face unreadable in the fading light. "You're starting to say things I'm not ready to hear. Then tell me what you are ready for." She looked out at the lake. "I'm ready to stop pretending this is temporary." He moved beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Then don't pretend. You're still a billionaire," she said quietly, "and I'm still not. I don't care about that. You don't now, but what happens when this isn't new anymore? When you realize you can't fit me into your world?" "I don't want to fit you into it, Delilah. I want to build something that fits both of us." She turned toward him, her eyes searching his. "If you mean that, you'll have to prove it." "I will." She nodded slowly, then leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then I guess I'm staying until the gala. You might not want to leave after." "Then don't give me a reason to." And for the first time in his life, Cameron didn't feel like he was negotiating a deal, he felt like he was making a promise. The gala shimmered beneath a canopy of stars, fairy lights strung across the garden like constellations brought to earth. A string quartet played beneath an ivy-covered trellis, and guests in tailored tuxedos and sweeping gowns sipped champagne in crystal flutes. Delilah stood near the edge of the crowd, her black velvet dress brushing the tops of her heels, her curls pinned into a soft-up dough that exposed the quiet strength in her shoulders. She hadn't looked for Cameron when she arrived. She'd needed a minute to breathe. Her camera hung from her side, unused. Tonight wasn't about capturing moments. It was about living one. When she finally spotted him by the fountain, he was deep in conversation with a man in his late 50s whose voice carried across the lawn with careless authority. "You're still too sentimental, that's your problem," the man was saying. "Emotion has no place in a boardroom." Cameron's jaw was tight, but his tone stayed measured. "It's not sentiment, it's strategy. The world's changing, and we either adapt or become obsolete." The man scoffed and turned away, brushing past Delilah without a glance. She approached Cameron slowly, her expression unreadable. "Friend of yours," he exhaled. "My father." Delilah's eyes tracked the older man as he disappeared into a circle of donors near the hedges. "He doesn't seem like someone who listens when others talk. He doesn't. Which is why I stopped trying years ago." "Is that why you built your life like a fortress?" Cameron turned to her fully then, his posture softening. "I built it so no one could take it from me. And now I'm realizing it's not worth much if I'm the only one inside." Her gaze held his, steady and warm. "What happens after tonight, Cameron? When the lights come down and the press stops caring who's on your arm?" "I don't want you on my arm." Her brow arched slightly, but before she could speak, he stepped closer, his voice low. "I want you beside me, in every room, in every decision. In every mess I make trying to be better than the man I was taught to be." Delilah's throat tightened, but she managed to keep her voice even. "That's not something you say because the music's pretty and the night smells like roses. I'm not saying it because of tonight. I'm saying it because of every day since I met you. You make me want to be worth the things I never thought I deserved." She glanced up at the sky, blinking hard. "I didn't come here to be someone's change agent. I know. And that's why you are." A hush fell over the crowd as a bell chimed from the terrace, signaling the start of the charity auction. Cameron took her hand without asking, leading her through the crowd toward the raised platform. The host, a woman in a sleek silver gown, stepped up to the microphone and smiled. "Our final item tonight is a private art residency abroad 2 weeks in a restored villa on the coast of Amalfi. Flights included, of course." Delilah's breath caught. She hadn't expected anything like that. As the bidding started, Cameron whispered, "You should go." She looked at him, startled. "What? You've spent years giving yourself to everyone else. It's time to take something for you." Her voice was barely audible. "I can't afford. I didn't say you had to buy it." Before she could protest, his hand went up. The auctioneer nodded. "Do I hear 65,000? Another bid." Then Cameron again, this time without hesitation. 75. The back and forth continued, escalating in tension and disbelief, until finally the auctioneer called "sold" to the gentleman in the navy at 110,000. Delilah stared at him. "That's more than what I make in 2 years." He didn't flinch. "And you're worth far more than that." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "You can't keep doing things like this." "I know, so let me do one more." Before the crowd could disperse, Cameron stepped onto the platform. The host blinked in confusion, but he leaned into the microphone before anyone could stop him. "I know this isn't part of the program," he said, his voice carrying across the garden, "but I'd like to make a final donation." The chatter died instantly. "I'd like to donate a scholarship in the name of Delilah Hayes to fund art education for underserved youth across the 5 boroughs. Full tuition, materials, and mentorship support." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Delilah stood frozen, hand at her throat. "And I'd like to do it," Cameron continued, "because without her, I would have forgotten what any of this was supposed to mean." He stepped down, the silence stretching until it was broken by hesitant applause, then louder, bolder, until the garden echoed with it. "Cameron," Delilah whispered as he reached her again, "why would you? Because I'm in love with you." Everything went still. "I didn't plan to be, I didn't want to be, but you walked into my life and made every carefully built wall feel like a prison." She looked at him, eyes shining. "And the truth is," he said, voice hoarse, "I don't want the penthouses or the jets or the legacy if I can't share it with you." Delilah stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. "You don't need to give me the world, Cameron. You just have to let me stand in it with you. Then stay." She didn't hesitate. "I'm not going anywhere." He pulled her into his arms, and the garden faded around them, the music, the lights, the whispers of people who hadn't believed someone like her could rewrite the story of someone like him. Weeks later, they returned to the city not as a CEO and his +1, but as something unshakable. She painted a new mural across the back wall of the community center, a skyline awash in sunrise colors, a silhouette of 2 figures standing side by side, hands linked, eyes toward the future. And every morning, as the city stirred awake, Cameron Bishop kissed the woman who'd taught him how to breathe, not because he needed her to complete him, but because she reminded him he was never meant to do it alone. The first real test came on a Tuesday. Cameron walked into the partners' strategy meeting and found his father seated at the head of the table where he hadn't sat in over a year. The room stiffened. Cameron's name was still on the agenda, still on the doors, but the air had changed. He took his seat slowly, nodding at the board members, most of whom he'd handpicked. They offered polite greetings, but their eyes darted between him and Edward Bishop with barely veiled tension. "We'll begin with an announcement," his father said, voice cool. "After much discussion with a few of the more seasoned board members, I've agreed to resume a more active leadership role in the company." Cameron kept his face still, but his pulse quickened. "This isn't a coup," Edward continued blandly. "It's support. We all know the last few months have been turbulent. A few eyes flinched toward Cameron and he realized what this was, not just a power play. A warning. He didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he sat through the rest of the meeting, listened to every thinly veiled jab disguised as a concern. Then he stood, collected his notes, and left before anyone could ask for comment. Back at his penthouse, Delilah was waiting. She had a canvas rolled out across the floor, knees tucked beneath her as she worked in long, thoughtful brush strokes. She looked up the moment the elevator doors whispered open. "You're early," she said, watching his face. He walked straight to her and dropped to the floor beside the canvas. "My father's trying to take the company back." Her brush paused mid-stroke. "Can he? I don't know yet. But he's rallying the board." She set the brush down and wiped her hands on a rag. "What are you going to do?" "I could fight. I could call in votes, threaten to pull capital, make noise." But Cameron's eyes met hers. "I'm not sure I want any more." Delilah tilted her head. "You love that company." "I built that version of it, but lately I've been wondering if I've been building the wrong thing." She leaned in, voice low. "What do you really want?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and touched the edge of the canvas. The painting was half-finished, a skyline melting into a sea of wild, impossible colors. It didn't look like the New York he knew. It looked like hope. "I want to create something that doesn't need to be defended in rooms full of men who have forgotten what risk looks like. I want to invest in ideas that terrify the people who think they've already won." Delilah smiled. "Then maybe it's time to stop sitting at their table." He kissed her then, slow and certain, and the decision solidified somewhere between the moment her hands slipped into his hair and the quiet way she whispered, "Whatever you choose, I'm right here." By Friday, Cameron had drafted his exit. Not a resignation, an evolution. He announced a new venture, a private investment firm focused on community-driven initiatives, mentorship for first-generation entrepreneurs, and funding for underrepresented creators. He called it Hayes and Bishop. Delilah stared at the name on the proposal. "You're serious?" "You gave me the blueprint," he said. "I just gave it an office." A month later, they moved into a restored brownstone in Soho. The top floor was her studio, flooded with light and scattered with canvases. The lower floors housed the firm, sleek, minimalist, and filled with people who didn't wear power like armor but like passion. Cameron didn't miss the boardrooms. He didn't miss the silence of corner offices or the endless cycle of profit and posturing. What he had now was louder, messier, and far more alive. One night, lying on the rooftop of their building, Delilah curled beside him beneath a blanket, the sky thick with stars and the hum of city life below them. She traced lazy circles on his chest with her fingers. "My lease is still technically active," she said. "The bakery misses me." "I could buy the building," he teased. She rolled her eyes. "Don't you dare." He laughed and turned onto his side to face her. "Marry me." Delilah froze, her breath catching. "Not because I want to put you in a glass box," he said. "Not because I want to fix anything. Just because I'm in love with you and I want to build a life that feels like this every damn day." She stared at him, heart pounding. "I didn't get you a ring," he added. "I figured you'd want to make your own." "I do," she said, voice cracking. "To the ring or the life?" "Both." The wedding was small. Not because they couldn't afford more, but because what they had didn't need an audience. They married in a garden surrounded by friends, former students, artists, and dreamers. Delilah wore ivory silk and golden earrings that once belonged to her grandmother. Cameron wore a suit he didn't let anyone else pick out. He didn't want this moment curated. He wanted it real. After the ceremony, they danced barefoot on the grass, laughing through the music, the guests, the champagne. There were no choreographed speeches. Just Cameron standing in the center of it all, pulling Delilah into his arms and whispering, "This is the only legacy I care about." Years passed, not in a blur, but in sharp, vivid snapshots. Delilah's art was exhibited in galleries across the world, but she always returned to the community center in Harlem, where she still taught twice a week. Cameron's firm grew steadily, partnering with schools, local businesses, and small tech startups with big hearts. They never stopped choosing each other, not once, not even when things got hard. They traveled when they needed air, stayed home when they needed quiet. They argued like real people, loved like the world was ending, and built something no boardroom could ever quantify. One spring morning, as sunlight spilled across their kitchen table and the smell of coffee lingered in the air, Cameron slid a manila envelope across to Delilah. "What is it?" she asked. "A proposal," he said. "Not business." She opened it to find a sketch he'd drawn, clumsy, disproportioned but unmistakably a house beside the sea with a studio in the back and a garden in bloom. "I found the land," he said. "We can build it, somewhere quiet, for later." Delilah looked up, eyes warm. "We're not there yet, I know," he said, "but someday." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Then I say yes." Again. And in that quiet, golden kitchen, where nothing was borrowed or borrowed time, where every choice had been earned, they smiled at each other like the beginning and the end of every story worth telling. Because some love stories don't just end with a kiss. Some end with a life.